Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be hosting a fireside chat today with Matthew Gold, CEO of NHSX. We're going to be talking about innovation, the NHS and the pandemic a year on. I'm Jenny Thomas. I run an organisation called Digital Health London. I'm also a startup coach, and I have a particular interest in a vertical of digital health called Femtech. At Digital Health London, we connect health tech startups with NHS staff and academia, and we equip them to improve the health of Londoners. So our most well-known programs are our Accelerator program, where we support health tech startups, and our Pioneer Fellowship, where we support NHS staff to get digital. 5 years ago, when Digital Health London was created, digital health was a bit of a cottage industry. It was an option, and it was a topic that people like me were interested in. But now, as we all know, digital health has really changed, and it's been thrown centre stage and played a pivotal role in the past 18 months. Matthew, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure that many people listening have had personal experiences of how healthcare has been delivered quite differently over the past 18 months. I've certainly had experiences myself. I remember sending a photo of my child's eye to my GP via a text using software of a company that was actually on our accelerator program called AccuRx. And I'm sure you've had experiences too of how you've used healthcare services differently. But what I thought would be really interesting to get into today is actually, what does that look like at scale? So how has digital health really played a pivotal role in the NHS's response to the pandemic?
Well, thank you, Jenny. And I think we have crammed probably a decade's worth of digital transformation into the last 18 months. And though in lots of respects, the last 18 months have been completely ghastly in all sorts of ways, this is one of, I think, the big silver linings. So at scale, we've seen several things happen. We've seen the interactions between clinicians and their patients move, not completely, but to a very large degree at times during the pandemic, online and become remote. And we've been able to see the impact of that and learn lessons about what works and doesn't work. We've seen a lot of people in the health service, as in many other sectors, work remotely themselves. And these two have had, I think, quite a serious impact together on attitudes, that things that were thought to be impossible actually turn out to be deeply possible. And more than that, the NHS, which doesn't have a reputation for doing things digitally at enormous speed, effected this transition at extraordinary speed. And it was a sort of massive team effort across the NHS. So I think those are two, but there's a third, which I think is probably more profound, which is the role that data played in the way that the pandemic was handled. Both at individual patient level, we made it really much easier for patient data to safely move around between clinicians, so that, as often happened during the pandemic, people were seeing patients they hadn't seen before and could see the sort of key elements of their record in a way which was really important for patient safety. Data flowed for direct care. Data flowed for research. So the fact that vaccines were developed at such an incredible pace, the fact that we were able to find out, for example, the efficacy of dexamethasone, was down to the role that data played, the ability to access that data safely and appropriately, but access it to develop those therapies. So data for research took a massive boost. And then, possibly almost as important, the way the crisis was managed relied on the aggregation of data across the system. One of the very first things my team did with NHS England colleagues was to set up the NHS data store, which meant that we could see very swiftly where there were pressure points in the system, where there was a shortage of oxygen or ventilator beds or clinicians. And then the same basis was really important during the vaccine rollout. So I think we went from knowing the theoretic potential of data, but not being able to exploit it to nearly the degree that we needed to really making impressive use of data and showing what the future might look like.
Yeah, I've certainly picked that up as well. I think that what would be really interesting to know is how do you think the NHS has embraced innovators? So working with digital health companies, for example, do you think that's been a big part of the response?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the last 18 months is a lot of what frustrated innovators previously, a sort of slow moving big system where every bit wanted to make its own decisions, judge safety and efficacy separately, not really look at what was working elsewhere, all the things that were very frustrating. I think many of them were put to one side through the pandemic because collectively we had this one overriding compelling objective around looking after the country during the pandemic. And so again, you saw innovation spread much faster. You saw companies that had interesting things to offer find their speed of adoption much faster. And I think you saw the centre, my team included, playing a much more useful role. So, and one of the things we had been working on before the pandemic, but really turbocharged, was the use of remote monitoring technologies. Because if you have somebody with a long-term condition, hypertension or cardiovascular or whatever it is, you can either have a model where they go in and see their consultant once every 6 months and have their blood pressure taken and their vitals checked and all the rest of it, which is the old model. Or you can give them a device which is digitally connected into their health record and their consultant, which measures their their blood pressure or whatever it is, on a sort of frequent or continuous basis. Means they don't have to keep schlepping into formal care settings, but it also means that the insight that the clinician gets into the patient is dramatically better. So the arguments for it are enormous, even before you get to the point where it's in a pandemic and you actually don't want people moving around. You want to be able to care for them at home. So during the pandemic, my team set up a procurement framework so that across the country, trusts could buy remote monitoring technology confidently without having to spend 6 months doing the procurement. We set up almost 100 virtual COVID wards. We pushed out a large number of blood pressure monitors for people with hypertension. And it was the start of a really big push that we're doing on remote monitoring technology. It would have happened had it not been for the pandemic, but it definitely gave the programme an enormous shove.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember you saying about a year ago that you wanted to bottle the learning and try and ensure that it was continued. So as much as possible, that pace of change was sustained, perhaps not to the same extent. But how do you feel that's possible now? So do you think that innovation is being embedded in the NHS, and that lessons have been learned from the past 18 months in terms of how to continue that good work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and it's it's always a bit dangerous when people play back to you your aspirations from a year previously. But the truth is, to some degree, the pendulum always swings back a bit. That sense of urgency, singularity of mission, compelling need to act, inevitably, as the pandemic eases off, some of the sort of things that slowed us down previously start to assert themselves a bit more. And the pendulum swings back on things like remote consultations. Been talking a lot to the Royal College of GPs, for example, around sort of how you find the balance between where we were before the pandemic, when there were almost no remote consultations, where we got to when a very, very high proportion of them were remote. Between the two, there's, I think, a sweet spot where, for those who it's clinically appropriate and convenient, remote consultations can still be incredibly helpful. There will, though, be some for whom seeing a GP in person is really important, and they should be seen in person. So there's always a bit of a sort of pendulum swinging back effect. But I think in a couple of respects, things have changed quite importantly. So one of the things that I've been banging on about in this job for as long as I've been in it has been the need for digital and innovation not to be off in a silo. So if you're the chief executive of a trust, you have your day job, and then there's this digital thing you have to do, but hopefully you can give it to your CIO and you won't be bothered with it, to being really front and center of health and care's own vision for its own future. And I think one of the things that's happened over the last couple of years has been a realization from the very top of the health service down that we can't continue exactly as we were with the same model of care being delivered in the same way. We have to, if we want to provide the same level of care, let alone a better level of care, we have to start doing things differently. Even without COVID, the pressures on the system, the growing demand, the growing cost of healthcare, the growing expectations are more than can be coped with just by doing more of the same. And I think that realization has really landed. And I was really heartened, for example, that the first line of the job description for the new chief executive of NHS England talked about digital transformation. One of the things we've done is try to bring clarity to the system so that innovators can more easily operate in it, because it's obvious what people in the system need to be doing and who should be paying for it. So the last few weeks, for example, we've put out guidance, two, I think, quite important guidance papers. One imaginatively titled What Good Looks Like, the other equally imaginatively titled Who Pays for What. And I think for the first time they set out really clearly
It's
for
pretty clear.
healthcare, for leaders at the front line, what they need to be doing in their organizations and their systems. And they'll know that they'll be assessed against that. And secondly, real clarity about what they are expected to pay for out of their own budgets and what they can look to the centre to pay for, because that lack of clarity became, I think, unwittingly became quite a serious disincentive to proper investment in digital innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly with this sustainability of it as well. That's really important to have that clarity. So how do you think then that, I think those documents are really useful, and I like the fact that it's also linked to the NHS operating framework. As a previous general manager myself, that actually that's your kind of Bible, and you do read it and it does give you that clear direction. But what about areas of healthcare that are perhaps more underserved? So areas like that I'm interested in, like women's health, or perhaps where there are more inequalities in healthcare. How do you think that we can ensure those things are really kind of addressed, and that we can, encourage organisations to really kind of embrace them? Do you think that the right incentives are there yet?
Not yet, but I think we're getting there. And I think one of the things, again, that's happened over the last couple of years has been a realization that it's not enough just to say you want to do these things, to say, yes, digital is very important, inclusion is very important. You actually have to align incentives to make it happen. And we've not always been brilliant at that. I think we've had a situation for too long where the aspiration is in one direction, but where the incentives were in another. And I think by integrating the need for digital transformation, the need for a sort of really clear approach on health inequalities, to be absolutely intertwined with the key planning guidance and the direction that comes out of NHS England to the system, and the standards and the incentives and the payment structures, we're starting, I think, to make some progress. I think particularly on the question of inequalities, and it's really important because this whole project will only work if we bring the professions and the public with us. And I think if we don't have a decent answer for what's this going to do to health inequality, I think it's a sure way to lose public and professional support and trust. And I think that the key message is, done well, digital can actually be a force for addressing inequalities. It can reach people, provide services to people in different ways, address issues that are in ways that are different and sometimes more effective than traditional ways of doing things. So, for example, remote consultations can be difficult for some, which is why you always need to have the possibility of face-to-face consultations. But for some people, because of the way they work or their family situation or whatever, it's a total lifesaver.
Yeah.
So I think just making sure that every digital program is designed we're trying to, with a knowledge of how it will affect different communities and different parts of the population, making sure the patient voice is heard, making sure that the data sets that we curate and use to develop or verify algorithms or whatever it is are representative data sets. And then crucially, creating a platform on which innovation can happen that will allow people to address particular needs of, whether it's sort of women or particular communities or particular geographies. And I mean, one of the things we've done that I'm really proudest of is we've said, and it's not been to everyone's liking, but we said the NHS app was not going to be something where we developed all the functionality in-house. Quite intentionally, we were going to build it to do the basics and the things that it was right that the NHS should do for itself. But then we were going to take the APIs, the data feeds that powered the app, and we were going to expose them so that anyone with sort of proper permissions could access them and either create their own patient-facing services, or, and this is where it gets really exciting, creating integrated services within the NHS app itself, with quite a seamless transition between a service provided sort of natively and a service that's provided from an innovator that's been commissioned to do so by a particular bit of a country or whatever it is. And that creates the potential for much more targeted innovation aimed at particular groups that need whatever it is. And I think that's quite exciting, because if we can get that ecosystem working with the platform that we've created, then I think the potential for innovators to come in and address particular issues and inequalities starts to rocket. And the exciting thing is, since we put the NHS COVID Pass, which my team developed, into the app, we've got well over 10 million more users of the app. So that's a fantastic platform for reaching out to and offer services to people that we didn't have before.
No, that's fantastic. So before we finish, are there any last comments or bits of advice you would give to anyone on the call today in terms of how you drive innovation in a large organisation like the NHS?
So I think the main lesson I've learned in this job has been it's very rarely the technology that's been the issue. Sometimes it is. And sometimes I think some of the most exciting stuff we've done at the cutting edge, for example, with the AI lab, is really sort of bleeding edge technology. But actually, for an organization of this size, it's much more about the people, the culture, and the systems. But then because technology is really interesting for people like us, and because technologists like doing technology, we say that, and then we tend to devote most of our time to the technology, to the systems, and not to the people side of things. And I think that constant attention to the what messages the leadership give to the wider team around technology, what structures we create, what incentives you create, how you make it easy in a distributed system for frontline leaders to do the right thing, rather than actually make it quite difficult for them to do the right thing and incentivize them to not to prioritize transformation using digital technologies. All of those are sort of really key things I think I've learned the last couple of years.
No, I'm so glad you said that, because I completely agree. I really think it is about the education, but it's also about the leadership and what's celebrated, what's recognised, what's talked about, and that can make a massive difference, as well as all of the other levers that we discussed in terms of having the right incentives in place, so that innovation is prioritised and it's not seen as a kind of, oh, that's a nice to do. It's actually a basic requirement of the job, and that is going to serve that that organisation well into the future. And I'm really looking forward, and I can already see organisations within the NHS that are going to become the innovation centres, and those are the ones that are investing in their staff, and the leadership is really passionate about the potential of digital. So thanks so much, Matthew, for your time today. It's been really interesting speaking to you. I hope everyone who's been listening has enjoyed it as well. I think that it's really clear that reimagining healthcare and embedding digital innovation in the NHS is a real challenge, as we've discussed, but it's also deeply important and truly exciting as well. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Jenny.